moment I was sure I wouldn't make it through. I was saved because of you. I don't know how, but you take all my pain and you turn it into something better. Ooh, something better. There's not a tear that you let go to waste. No, you turn it into something better. Ooh, something better.
I remember a few years ago, Rachel and I got married, maybe more than a few, but we got to go to Hawaii. And you ever done those sunset cruises, whether it's in Florida or somewhere else, where they take you out on the boat and it's beautiful and it's calm? And it was great, because as the boat's moving, like sometimes the wake draws the dolphins and the dolphins are in the wake and you have a clear destination. You're going to get back to the resort or your Airbnb or whatever it is, and you're just having a good time. I remember a time I went out with my buddy David, and we went to Anchor Bay, and we were going to do fishing on his boat. And so we went out in the boat, and he got so upset. Like literally in the first 15 minutes, I caught some monsters, and he's just like, "What is the deal?" But there's sometimes when you're out on the boat and you're enjoying yourself that an unexpected storm sweeps in, and all of a sudden you didn't know it was happening, and it comes in, and the storm is going to bring the waves and the darkness in the sky, and you need to get off the water, and so you're moving. But sometimes after that storm comes, something better comes. Sometimes you wash up on a shore, you head in a direction you never meant to go, or just something, maybe the fishing is better after the storm. Maybe the rainbow comes out and there's this beauty of the sunset and the rainbow, but something better usually comes after the storm. And sometimes we are looking for that idea of safe storm, something better. Every person in this room has experienced this rhythm of going from something safe into a storm and experiencing something better. Every person in the Bible has experienced this rhythm, moving from safe to storm to something better. We see it all over the place. What is this? Safe is this idea of where everything makes sense. You are oriented to your normal. It is the normal that you live by. It is settled. It is safe. It is secure. It is stable. And in those seasons, you're just thankful. As the older I get, the more I really enjoy having a season of safe. Just give me some settled, secure, stable, and I enjoy it. But then there's storms of life. And the storms of life come, and they make you feel insecure, and sometimes they're suffering and sorrow, and sometimes they're just a crisis, and sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's kids. It seems to always be related to kids. But sometimes this crisis comes in. It could be one teacher, it could be one doctor visit, it could be just one thing that happens, and all of a sudden one client calls and there's a problem, and you have a storm that you're working through. This idea of the pit and moving out of the pit, oftentimes for me, maybe this is true for you, is that when the storm hits, I just say to myself, I wish I could just go back to safe. And God's like, I don't work that way. I don't move in reverse. I move in forward. And so he moves from storm to something better. So let me give you a couple biblical examples and see if you agree with me. So I want to show you Egypt. And so there's this idea that the Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years as slaves. And so this idea is that they become slaves, and this was their new normal. So they're up in Egypt, they're working as slaves, and you know how they got there. They got there through famine, and they got there through Joseph and all kinds of things. But they're in Egypt for 400 years as slaves to the Egyptians. And then God moves them from Egypt to the wilderness. And this is a storm. You would think, I want out of here, but they thought they were going to die. There's no water, there's no food, there was the risks of the wilderness, and they wanted just to go back to Egypt to be safe. And God says, I don't work in reverse. We're in wilderness for a while. But what happens after those 40 years? They move into something better called the Promised Land. Of course, it would be nice if God gave us the high beams and the headlights to see where we're heading, but he doesn't tend to work like that either. He tends to light a lamp unto our feet one step at a time, which makes it a little more faith needing. You have to have faith that God is moving you in the right direction. How about this example? Let me show you Jesus. So Jesus has eternally been on the throne forever, right? There is no beginning As we saw in the Nicene Creed, there was a begotten Son, but the begotten Son means he was so well known in the Father's mind that he was eternally existent for all time. And so Jesus has always been on the throne. But in God's perfect timing, he comes into the womb of Mary and he goes to the cross. He moves from safe to the storm. And even Jesus in the garden prayed to God in his humanity and said, if there's any way you could take this cup of suffering away from me. And the Father said, no. And what is the something better? Salvation, glorification, all kinds of amazing things. But I'll tell you, every person in the Bible experiences moving from safe to storm to something better. Every person in this room has moved from safe to storm to something better. And I wanted to invite you to turn to the book of Ruth, where we're going to look at Ruth and Naomi and their life and their movement from safe to storm to something better. And before we start reading this, let me give you just a slide here on introducing the characters, because you need to know who everybody is. So you have Elimelech, and what would his nickname be? Limmy? What would you call him? Elimelech, he's an Israelite, he's the dad. And across you have Naomi, she's the mom. And she's an Israelite. You have two sons on the left-hand side here. You have Mahlon and Chilion, and they are both Israelites. And then they're going to marry two women, Ruth and Orpah, and those are the daughter-in-laws, and they're from another country called Moab. And they're Moabites, and they're Israelites. So these are the people. So if you look with me in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and two sons, Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. 3 family members, because of famine in Israel, moved to Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Epaphrates from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and without her husband. So we see this rhythm again in Naomi's life, don't we? Take a look at this rhythm. We go from safe to storm to something better. Safe, they lived in their country, Israel, and Judah, in their country, Israel, with their community. The storm hit, the famine forced them to move. You need food to survive, so they moved to where the food was. Something better, they found food and survived. That's the rhythm. But there's another rhythm going on that we see. Look at this rhythm. The safe, family was together, sons were married. Now I'm at this point in my family's life, right before some of the kids begin to move out. You know, they're getting in their 20s, 24, 21, and they're getting ready to move out, and I love the fact that we're all together. I love it. But they're getting ready to spread their wings and be independent and go, and that's the right thing for them to do at the right timing. But isn't it great? There's a moment that you just enjoy having your family all together. I remember when my daughters, they would go sleep over at somebody's house, and this might be a little bit odd for you, but maybe you did it as a dad or a mom, and say my middle daughter, Eliana, was sleeping over at someone's house. I would find my way where I went up to her room and just sat on her bed while she's at somebody else's house, and I just felt like the family wasn't all there. And they weren't, literally. I knew where she was, but I just felt like an absence. And so I see this. The family was all together. The sons were married to women, and the storm hits. The husband dies. Both sons died, and there are no grandchildren. Now, grandparents, we have some grandparents in the room. We're down in Florida this past week with a family they were formerly from New York. They moved down to the East Coast, and a grandmother, she's a fairly newer grandmother, she literally said, I would throw my 4 children in front of a moving bus for my one grandchild. So funny. Kind of clears it up, doesn't it? All right, safe. Family was all together. The sons were married. The storm hits. Husband dies. Both sons die. No grandchildren. Something better. Anybody use TBD at work? To be determined. Naomi is still in the storm. Now, when I'm in the storm, I kind of anticipate what I know she's going to say. Do you know what she's going to say? She's not happy, is she? She's lost her husband. She's lost her 2 boys. She's lost in an agrarian society. Who's going to help them eat? How are they going to find food and protection and provision? And so Naomi hears that the famine has ended in Israel, so the food is back and available in Israel, and they decide to leave Moab and return to Israel. One of the daughter-in-laws, Orpah, decides to remain in Moab. That's where she was born and raised. Her family is probably there, and so she stays there. But Ruth's words are amazing. Ruth from Moab says, I'm going with you. And Naomi's trying to talk her out of it. Stay here with your family. Stay here with your friends in your community. I'm going to go back to my community. And Ruth says some things that are amazing here in verse 16. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Rachel and I, at our wedding, we used these words as part of our reading. So we had put together a reading of various passages in the Bible, and this was one of the passages that we put in there because it's this unbelievable connection that you see between 2 human beings, whether it's a husband and wife, but interestingly, between a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law. That there is this not only attachment, but connection, a spiritual connection. Your God will be my God. Your community will be my community. Your people, my people. I will not leave you. I am by your side. I am with you. It is actually kind of like a spiritual adoption. It's beautiful. And it's very interesting that you have this Moabite woman who was raised up with other gods than the God of Israel, the God that we know. And she says, I will give up those gods and I want your God. And so Naomi and Ruth return to Israel. They go to Bethlehem, and it's amazing. In verse 19, so the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? And she's in the storm. Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. 4 times, Naomi clarifies that the Lord did this. The Lord took my husband and my boys. The Lord afflicted me. The Lord brought misfortune upon me. I don't have grandchildren. I don't have sons. I don't have a husband. I don't have a future. I don't even know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to eat. I don't know where things are going to go. I don't know. This is the wrong time to come alongside her and say, Naomi, all things work together for good for those who love him. That's the wrong time. This is when you weep with those who weep. This is when you're different than the friends of Job who battle with him mentally, theologically. And sometimes you just sit with somebody and you love them and you let them say the words that they need to say. But they know that you are with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as someone who loves somebody going through the storm is just to be by their side. Sometimes saying no words is better than saying some of the words that you want to say. Sometimes saying no words, but being by their side is better. A widow without adult children was in a precarious position, lacking long-term financial support, so she needed help from the community. But she made quite an entrance, didn't she? She returns, and the whole town was stirred up, and she's like, oh, I believe in God. And here's what God did to me. Naomi wasn't happy. She was bitter when her life was moved from safe to the storm. I've been there. You've been there? I don't have any judgment for Naomi. Do you have judgment for Naomi? Like, it is a struggle, isn't it? When you move from safe to storm. That's a pretty big one. Losing her husband, losing her boys, no grandchildren, fear of the future. You know, it makes me laugh at myself with my little storms that have come into my life and I've overreacted. But I'm sure God gives us what we can handle with his help. You've had some of these storms, haven't you? And that's why we don't judge Naomi. We understand right where she is. But here's Naomi. Naomi knew this truth. God is God. He's in control and he's sovereign. No doubt about it. 4 times she says, God did this, God caused this, God allowed this, God did this. God is the one. The Lord is the one. God is God and he's in control. He's sovereign. I hope you know that. I hope you know, and we'll talk about it more one day, but theologically, biblically, he foreknows everything. He's not surprised by anything. He knows my thoughts, my intentions, my motives. He knows what I will do next. He knows the words I will choose. He knows what I'm going to do tomorrow. He has no questions. He knows he's in control. Naomi still had to learn this truth, that she needed to add a letter O. God is God, but God is also good. He's also good. He's not only in control, but he's always working for our good. So, if you're in the storm or the pit, I apologize if this comes off insensitive, but this is what church is for. This is where in church we try to build into you the foundation so when the storm hits, you are ready and that you can weather through it because you know something better is coming. In Romans 8:28, in all things God works for the good of believers. In all things. When people sin against you, God works all things for good. When suffering comes your way, God will work for good. When you do something dumb and create problems in your life, God will work things for good for a believer. Genesis 50:20, Joseph says, you intended to harm me, you sinned against me, you wanted to murder me, hurt me, but God intended it for good. Now I see intended it for good previous to when it happened, meaning even though brothers intended to harm Joseph, God, before they did it, intended to use it for good. So let me crystallize the big issue that some of us will have in the storm, but why many people walk away from Jesus. The common question is this: if God is always working for our good, then why do bad things happen? Let's get better. That's kind of an easy one. Is it because God is not in control? Nope, that's not it. I believe he's in complete control. Second, so God allowed it or caused it? Yes, he did. Getting harder. So here's the question. If God allowed people to sin against me and hurt me, how is that good? How can the sin of others be part of the good that God is working in our lives? If God allowed people to sin against me and hurt me, how is that good? How can the sin of others be part of the good that God is working in our lives? When our life moves from safe to storm, people get angry, sad, depressed, distanced from God. Elimelech, the husband, the best friend, the provider, the sons, the loves of her life died too young, and how unfair. Is God good? How are these awful things good? This is the question that people ask. This is the question I've asked. Maybe you've asked this question to God. In the midst of the pit and the storm, I really would like to know, when people sinned against us, when people meant evil and suffering against us, how is this good? So let's look at some answers. Allowing sin and suffering is not good in and of itself. Just as Jesus' crucifixion and unjust death is not good in itself, the act of the sin of killing Jesus is by far the most terrible thing in history. The just God is executed for no legal, no moral, or ethical reason that would be sound. It's wrong. It's terrible. It's the worst. The act of their sin to kill Jesus is bad. When people sin against you, it's bad. When people are awful to you, it's bad. When you sin against people and you are awful to people, it's bad. That thing is bad. That is not the thing that we're talking about that's good in and of itself. There are things that come into our life that are just sin, suffering, awfulness, and that is the thing that we're not talking about. God is at work working things together for good. Let me ask you this. Were the angels joyously celebrating at the moment Jesus is suffocating to death? No. But I bet you the demons were. I bet you the demons were joyously celebrating when he's taking his last breath, saying, "We've won! We've won! He's dead." Theologians speculate that there was profound silence in heaven when Jesus took his last breath, because the angels were on the edge of their seat waiting for the mystery to be revealed. What would this be? What's going to happen? We know that this is part of the Father's plan, but we don't understand how this thing whole works. God's working for a greater good. God's working for something better, for your character to be developed into the image of Jesus. His good work is not preventing all of the sin and suffering of this life. The Father could have prevented, theoretically, Jesus' death on the cross, but didn't. God's job is not to prevent all of the sin and suffering of our lives. If that's what you think God's job is, you're wrong. God takes whatever that sin and suffering is and makes it good into something better. And if you get the idea of Jesus, that he theoretically could have stopped the sin and suffering of Jesus, what could be better than the life of Jesus without death? What if Jesus didn't die? Well, let me ask you this question. Did something really better happen when Jesus died? When they sinned against him and executed him, did something better actually happen? If you were Joseph and Mary, the parents, what would have been better than to keep your son alive? If you were the apostles, the disciples, what would have been better to keep Jesus alive? Let me go through. This is where I need you to strap in a little bit, okay? We're going to go deep. Is that all right? You guys ready? All right, here we go. If you get this, I think you get your answer to the biggest of life's questions of when bad things happen, how is God good? Jesus, the worst in the thing in the world, killed on the cross. What happens? What's the something better? He goes from throne to cross to something better. He is exalted to the highest position. For the cross, God highly exalted Jesus. Universal worship. For the cross, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. His death and resurrection demonstrated his authority over sin, death, powers of darkness. For the cross, he was given a due inheritance. He was enthroned as the rightful king and received the everlasting worship of all people. Is this something better? Don't judge me yet. Let's go on. A redeemed humanity. For the cross, the Father gives Jesus a central reward for Jesus is redeemed humanity, the church, redeemed people who will praise and glorify him eternally. How about reconciliation? For the cross, he reconciles humanity to God, overcoming the separation caused by sin. For the cross, spiritual satisfaction. Jesus is described in Isaiah as being satisfied after his suffering because he saw the generations of believers who would be saved through his sacrifice. Because he went to the pit, to the cross, these things happened. Don't judge me yet. There's a little bit more. How about this? Atonement and victory. For the cross, propitiation. Jesus' death was a propitiation and atoning sacrifice that not only removed God's wrath, but turned it into favor for those who believe. How about victory over death? For the cross, a definitive victory over sin and death. And he shares it with all of us followers. How about this one? For the cross, a new covenant. Jesus established a new covenant with his blood, which provides eternal redemption and forgiveness of sins. Is it something better? And if Jesus was willing and the Father was willing to allow people to sin and execute his Son for those 9 reasons, is it something better? I think I was in my 20s, and I had learned some lessons from God. One of them was like, hey, if something happens in your career and things don't go well, God will work it out, and something better will come. And then I learned it like maybe with some friendships. You know, like if some friendships were in turmoil or challenge or something like that, God will work it out and something better. But I was in this long-term relationship before Rachel, and it ended after 7 years. And it was serious, as you would imagine. And I was a mess. You remember I called you, Mom? I called my mom, and I was just weeping. You know, I was in my mid to late 20s, and I was like, where is my life going? And that's in that pit, in that storm is when God says, hey, if you believe this truth about safe storm, something better in your job, and you believe it in your friendship, safe storm, something better, how about you believe it in your boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, safe storm, something better? How about you believe it in more and more areas of your life? And that, for me, was this idea of God continuing to expand my faith into new and different areas. And I think what he put in my head is, if you don't get there, I'm going to have to teach you. And it's going to hurt every time. So just believe me. I've shown you in a few easy ones. Now I got to show you in the harder ones. And there's going to be even harder ones. So believe. So I don't have to teach you. I think it's pretty amazing to think about what if the Father had stopped the crucifixion to minimize Jesus' suffering. What if God stopped the suffering in your life to minimize the suffering in your life, and you didn't get to the something better? I wonder if you really would have wanted that rather than the something better. God does not stop the Jews' intentional killing of Jesus. Is that loving? The act of the sin in and of itself is not good, but it's what God does with it that is beautiful and something better. Yes, when people hurt you and slander you and say things about your children or whatever it is in your life, that act is not good. It's awful. That's not what we judge God on. That's human responsibility for their sinfulness. What you need to look for is, what's God going to do with this thing? Will God show up like he says he will and work all things together for good for those who love him? Will he say to you, even though they intended harm and sin against you, I intended it for good. Watch what I'm going to do. All of us experience these safe seasons, these stormy seasons. And maybe for now, you just need to ask yourself, which season am I in? Am I in a safe season? If you are, take a breath and just enjoy this moment. And if you're in a stormy season, it's hard. You might be in the time where God is silent. You might be in the time that's suffering, or you feel stuck. You feel insecure, you feel disrupted, you feel disoriented, you feel these things, and you're just like, is this ever going to end? And I would say, just like I had to learn over and over again, he did it in the past. The pit came to an end. He moved me from storm to something better over and over and over again. So why are you doubting that he's going to move you from the storm to something better now? And all your answer can be is because I'm in the pit now. And it hurts. And so I'm just asking you, if he's taught you this truth in your life and in every Bible character, can you put your faith into the reality that he promises to move you to something better? Last one on this idea is God's working for a greater good in heaven, who you become in this lifetime dramatically affects who you will be for the rest of your eternity. So we're back to the safe, storm, and something better. Let me wrap up Ruth here with this idea of a love story. Who doesn't like a love story? It's time for Naomi and Ruth to move from the storm to something better. Naomi and Ruth are living in Israel. They're poor. They need food. So Ruth, being young, goes out into the fields and gleans or gathers the leftover grain, what poor people do. Ruth happens upon a field belonging to a landowner named Boaz. And this Boaz was related to Elimelech, who was the husband. Boaz's kindness, he notices Ruth. Gentlemen, he notices Ruth. Upon learning of her loyalty to Naomi and her diligent work, he shows her great favor, and he instructs his employees to leave her extra grain. And he protects her physically from sexual assault. Naomi realizes that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. What this is, a relative who by Jewish law had the right and duty to marry a childless widow. Let me slow down. A right and duty to marry a relative, Elimelech's relative, to marry a childless widow, Ruth, to preserve the deceased, Elimelech's and Mahlon and Chilion's deceased husband's family line and inherit the land. Brother might step in for brother, uncle steps in, nephew steps in, whatever it is, kinsman redeemer. Naomi instructs Ruth to go to the threshing floor and request marriage from Boaz. What? If my children are watching this, I am not instructing you to go ask the guy for your hand in marriage. I'm not instructing that. But Naomi says to Ruth, go and tell Boaz that you want him to invoke the kinsman redeemer and be married to you. And Boaz publicly declares his intent to marry Ruth, and he will buy the land. And look at this. Ruth 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, the mother-in-law, praise be to the Lord, for this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. Here is the something better. Finally, after years and years of pain and decades of pain, losing her husband and her children and no grandchildren, losing one of her daughters-in-law and coming back and not knowing where she's going to be fed, this guardian redeemer, this kinsman redeemer is going to care for her and Ruth. He's going to provide food and care and protection and provision, and he's fulfilling the legal call of the Bible, of the words of the scriptures to say, step in for the good of the legacy and lineage, and he does it, and Naomi feels the movement from storm to something better, but can it go even further? Is there one more massive thing that God does to make this an exclamation point on something better? Look at this lineage. You have Naomi, Ruth's spiritually adopted mother, and you have Boaz and Ruth connected to Naomi. They have a child named Obed. Obed has a child named Jesse, who happens to be the father of David, King David, and 1,000 years later from the lineage of David comes Jesus. Something better? Something better. Safe, storm, something better. I guess the one takeaway I would tell you is this. For you in the storm, it's your ticket to something better. The storm is your ticket to something better. And I can biblically guarantee you it's coming. Be patient. You don't know what's right around the corner. You are not hopeless. You are not without hope. You know God promises these things. You know God is in control, and you wonder if he loves you. But if God is in control, he can fulfill his promise. And his promise is something better is coming, for he will work all of it together for good. Do you believe he's in control? Yes. So therefore, you believe that he can fulfill his promises? Yes. But will he fulfill them for you? He knit you together in your mom's womb. He knew you before you were ever conceived. He knew you before the world was ever created. He knew you before Jesus and the cross. He knew you in his eye. He knows every single one of us, and he adores us. We are his children. We are brothers and sisters in Christ, and if he is willing to do all of that for Jesus, won't he do something? We don't even ask for that much. Will he make sense of your storm? Certainly. Come on. You can believe that, can't you? Yeah? Can we believe that? Heavenly Father, thank you. Amazing promises. Would you give us faith to help our unbelief in the moments of the pit? Would you give us words to help other people in the pit? And maybe not words, but just to be with them, hold their hand, cry with those who cry, being confident and maybe in silent prayer, praying these things for them, that they would have the faith to believe. And maybe we could be the ones with stronger faith for the ones in the weaker faith moments, that they could just take a little of ours, that we will hold on to them and strengthen them in the difficult moments. But God, for those in the pit, draw their eyes to something better. It's coming. It's right around the corner. It's here. It's ready. And it's time for you, Lord. In your perfect timing, would you move us from the storm to something far better. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thank you for coming out today. We're so glad we got to worship with you. You got communion. Awesome. Got to worship our Lord. If you want to see the progress on the building, you can head down the hallway. But have a great day. We love you guys.